Welcome to UK Worlds, your trusted source for breaking headlines, global insights, and sharp analysis from around the world. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. In the early hours of January 2026, Caracas was rocked by the roar of U.S. military aircraft. Under President Donald Trump's orders, elite U.S. forces executed a daring raid on the Venezuelan presidential residence. In a stunning turn, President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, were captured and flown to the United States to face long-standing criminal charges, including narco-terrorism and conspiracy. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi declared this the culmination of years of investigation, framing the operation as a law enforcement action, not an invasion. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau announced, "The tyrant is gone. He will now face justice." Senator Mike Lee assured the world that the operation was over, emphasizing it was a targeted strike, not the start of a war. This marked a dramatic escalation in U.S.-Venezuela relations, crossing a line never before breached: the direct military apprehension of a sitting head of state. The move ignited global debate about sovereignty, international law, and America's role as a global power. For the U.S., it was the end of Maduro's rule. For the world, it was the start of a new, uncertain era. The shockwaves were immediate, with questions swirling about the precedent set by this unprecedented action. The world watched, uncertain what would follow this bold and controversial move. The capture of Maduro was not just a dramatic end, it was the beginning of a new chapter in international relations. The global response was swift. The UN Security Council convened an emergency session at Colombia's request, reflecting regional anxiety. In the chamber, ambassadors faced the reality that any attempt to censure the US would be blocked by its veto. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, via Rosemary DiCarlo, expressed grave concern over regional instability and questioned the legality of the U.S. action. The U.S. defended its move as a necessary measure against a criminal regime, while most nations condemned it as a violation of sovereignty. The debate quickly became a standoff: American power versus the principles of international law. The session exposed deep divisions, with the Security Council paralyzed by geopolitics. The world's eyes were on New York, as the rules of the international order were openly contested. The question, could sovereignty be breached by force, even in the name of justice? Latin America's response was immediate and fierce. Brazil's ambassador called the U.S. raid a grave affront to Venezuelan sovereignty, warning of a dangerous precedent. President Lula da Silva declared the U.S. had crossed an unacceptable line, threatening regional stability. Colombia, despite its issues with Maduro, condemned the operation and deployed troops to its border. President Petro's fiery speech underscored the region's outrage, invoking the specter of armed resistance if Colombia's sovereignty were ever threatened. Mexico, Cuba, Chile, and others joined in condemnation, citing violations of the UN Charter and denouncing the action as imperialist aggression. Even US-friendly nations voiced strong opposition, recalling painful histories of intervention. The region's leaders saw the raid as a direct challenge to self-determination and non-interference, principles hard-won in the 21st century. The collective memory of past U.S. interventions fueled a powerful, unified backlash. For Latin America, this was not just about Maduro, it was about defending regional autonomy. The message to Washington was clear: the era of silent acquiescence was over. Outside the Americas, China and Russia led the global outcry. China's Fu Kong condemned the U.S. for trampling Venezuela's sovereignty, demanding Maduro's release and an end to American bullying. Russia's Vasily Nebenzia called the raid armed aggression, warning it signaled a return to lawlessness where might makes right. Both nations, longtime backers of Maduro, saw the strike as a direct challenge to their interests and a threat to global stability. Their condemnation was echoed by Iran, North Korea, South Africa, and Indonesia, forming a broad coalition against U.S. unilateralism. For Moscow and Beijing, this was about defending international law and their own influence in the Western Hemisphere. The crisis became a rallying point for nations wary of American power. The opposition to the U.S. action transcended old Cold War lines, uniting diverse countries in protest. The message unchecked interventionism threatened the very foundations of the UN Charter. The world's major powers were now openly at odds over the rules of global conduct. The US faced not just regional, but global resistance to its actions. The stage was set for a new era of great power confrontation. America's European allies walked the diplomatic tightrope. The EU, through Kaja Kallas, called for restraint and respect for international law, urging de-escalation. France condemned the operation as illegal, but labeled Maduro a dictator, highlighting Europe's ambivalence. President Macron stressed the need for a peaceful transition involving opposition leader Edmundo González Urrutia. The UK distanced itself, denying prior knowledge and reaffirming its commitment to the rules-based order. Spain offered to mediate, reflecting deep discomfort with unilateral action. Europe's response revealed a transatlantic rift support for Maduro's removal, but unease with the means. The fear that this precedent could unravel decades of international law and stability. At the UN, the US mounted a vigorous defense. Ambassador Mike Waltz insisted the raid was a law enforcement action, not an act of war, citing criminal indictments against Maduro. He invoked the 1989 Panama Precedent and Article 51 of the UN Charter, arguing the operation was self-defense against a narco regime. The US narrative diplomatic and economic pressure had failed, leaving no choice but to act. Critics, however, saw this as a thinly veiled military intervention, not justified by imminent threat. Legal experts argued Article 51 did not apply and the Panama Precedent was itself controversial. The international community remained unconvinced, viewing the law enforcement label as a cover for classic intervention. The US stood isolated, its justification rejected by most of the world. Amid global condemnation, a few allies cheered the US action. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu praised Trump's leadership, calling Maduro's removal a victory for freedom. Argentina's President Milei celebrated the news, urging Venezuela's opposition to seize the moment for democracy. Ecuador's President Noboa echoed support, pledging aid to the opposition and hailing the end of tyranny. For these leaders, ideology trumped concerns over sovereignty. They saw the intervention as liberation, not invasion. The Trump administration amplified these endorsements, claiming support from the free world. For this small group, extraordinary measures were justified to remove a dictator. Their backing gave Washington a sliver of international validation, but underscored its isolation. In Venezuela, chaos and uncertainty reigned. Maduro's loyalists denounced the US raid as military aggression and kidnapping, accusing Washington of neo-colonial motives. On Caracas streets, reactions were mixed. Some celebrated Maduro's ouster, hoping for liberation. Others feared deeper instability. Years of economic collapse and repression fueled both hope and anxiety. Fears of civil war and occupation triggered a new wave of refugees, with thousands fleeing toward Colombia. The power vacuum was immense. No one knew who controlled the military or state institutions. Opposition leader Edmundo González Urrutia called for calm and a peaceful transition, but lacked real authority. The US insisted its military action was over, but the risk of chaos remained high. Venezuela was suspended between hope for democracy and fear of deeper crisis. The human toll mounted as families fled, uncertain what future awaited them. The nation held its breath, teetering on the edge of transformation or disaster. The US strike on Venezuela ignited a global debate over sovereignty and the rules of international order. Most nations and legal experts called the operation a clear violation of the UN Charter, warning it set a dangerous precedent. Critics feared it could legitimize military interventions by powerful states against weaker ones, eroding the post-World War I consensus. The specter of gunboat diplomacy loomed, with international law at risk of being bent by the strong. Venezuela's future was uncertain. A peaceful transition was possible, but so was internal conflict and prolonged crisis. The world remained deeply divided, making coordinated stabilization efforts unlikely. The true legacy of Maduro's capture may be the questions it raised about the global order. Will this be a one-off, or the start of a new era of interventionism? As Maduro faces trial in New York, the real trial is that of the international system itself. The world now waits to see if the principles of sovereignty and non-intervention can survive this historic test.